Now that we've got a controller built, we can start exploring some other things that we can do with the controller. Specifically, we're going to use the controller to bring in waves of enemies. Now, right now, if I take a look at my room, I've got an enemy placed in the room. And the problem with that is once I destroy the enemy, it's gone. Now, I could write a script that say when it's destroyed, create another enemy, and I could have it kind of infinitely go on like this. But with a controller using a timeline, I can bring in formations of enemies and really kind of have a lot more control over my player experience. So let's figure out how to do this. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close out of this workspace right here, and I'm going to click on the timelines folder. I will then click on the plus up here and go to timelines and create myself a timeline. We're going to call this level 1 timeline. And what we can do is we can start adding moments into here. And that those moments basically happen 60 times a second. So if I were to say moment 30, that would be a half a second into the game. Moment 60 would be 1 second into the game. Moment 120 would be 2 seconds into the game, and so on and so on. So I'm going to go ahead and click on add. I'm going to change this from moment 0. I'm going to delete that. I'm going to say moment 60, so it happens 1 second into the game. And this basically programs just like anything else. I'm going to create an object just like I do when I create my lasers. So I'm going to bring this out. And the object I'm going to create is going to be my object enemy. Now, the location of that is not going to be relative. It's going to be a specific spot in the room. So I want it to show up outside of the room on this side over here. So we know that this is basically our room width, which I think is, I can't remember what it is, 1366 or something. But it doesn't matter, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in here room and then use the room width variable. Now, just to make sure it's all the way outside the room, I'm going to add some additional pixels, so maybe like another 50 pixels or so. If your sprite is bigger, you might need to add more than 50. It might need to be 75 or 100, depending on how big your sprite is. You'll have to figure that out for yourself. As far as my Y, I'm going to have it show up somewhere in the middle of the room. So I'm just going to say room, and I'm going to do room height this time, but I'm going to divide it by 2. So the division, it's the sort of the backslash. You can find that on your number pad if you got a number pad, or it's just below the question mark next to the right-hand shift key. So I'm going to do /2 or divided by 2. So that'll put it kind of in the middle of the room. It'll be a little bit high, but it depends a little bit on where my origin is. It might be a little bit low depending on that origin. And that's pretty much it. Now, what I can do is I can go into my room and I can delete. I got to go to my instances, and now I can delete this object. And what's going to happen is we're going to now play our game, and we're going to look for that enemy to come in, but it's not coming in. So what's going on? It should have been more than a second now, and there's no sign of that enemy coming in. So why is that? Well, we've got to, now that we've built a timeline, we have to tell an object to actually run it. So I'm going to close this level 1 tab, and I'm going to go ahead into my objects, and I'm going to open up my object controller. Our object controller is what's going to basically be in charge of our level 1 room, or our level 1 timeline. So I'm going to go ahead, add event, and create. And in this create event, this is where we're going to put that timeline. So to do that, I'm going to type in my search, I'm going to type in timeline, and this is the button that I'm looking for. Okay, the set timeline instance. I'm going to put that in my create event. And the timeline that I'm going to choose is going to be under timelines here. It's going to be the level 1 timeline. And it will start right away. And we are not going to loop it because we'll end up putting a boss in the back at the end of it, and that will get us to level 2. So if we loop it, we'd beat the boss and then we go back to the beginning of the game. That's not what we want. Now, when I click on play, I'll take a look at this, and there's my enemy showing up 1 second into the game. Brilliant. So now all I have to do is start building onto my timeline and adding more and more moments. So I can keep that in the create event there. I'm just going to go ahead to my level 1 timeline and bring that back. And now what I do is I add, and I can add a second, a second moment here. So instead of at moment 61, I might make it moment 120. So this happens 2 seconds into the game. And I can bring in multiple enemies this time and put them in different places. So I'm going to bring out a create instance, And this is going to be, actually, let's do a random one first. So watch this. We're going to go into our object, bring out an enemy. Now, my X is always going to be kind of room width. And I might add, I can add different amounts of pixels to the end of that to make sure it appears off the screen. But my Y, this time, I want to make it so that it might show up in a random place. So it's a lot more unpredictable as to where this enemy might come in. Because, game players, they're good at sort of seeing patterns. And if they always know when the enemy's going to come in, they'll be able to position themselves and just breeze through it. So to do this, we're going to use a variable called random. And you can see it's right here, this random X. Okay. Now, what it's saying inside these parentheses, it wants a value. So it's going to pick a random number between 0 and whatever I put in here. So I can make it room height. Okay. So it's going to pick a random number between 0 and whatever the room height is. But the problem is that it might choose the very, very bottom of the screen, or it might choose the very, very top of the screen where we have that scoreboard. So we don't want it to pick, we want it to be somewhere like more between here and here, as opposed to being able to go all the way up to the top. So what we need to do is we need to take that room height and we need to subtract some value out of that. So I might give myself a 50 pixel border. So what I'm going to actually do is where it says random room height, I'm going to do random room height minus 100. And I'm actually going to put that, actually I'm going to put that inside the parentheses. So I got to go right here, minus 100. So now this value, let's say my room height was 800. My value is now going to be between 0 and 700. But I also want to add 50 because I don't want it to show up here at 0. So I'm going to go ahead and do plus, I'm going to go ahead and do plus 50 here. And I accidentally deleted my object, so I got to put it back in here. So I'm going to do a random room height minus 100, whatever that is, and then I'm going to add 50 to it so that it will drop down from the top. Okay, so this will be 2 seconds into the game. And so what I'll be able to do is when I play it now, I'll see my first enemy come in, and my second enemy showed up down there. Now, if I were to play it again, that second enemy might show up in a similar place, or it might show up in a different place. So it's sort of a similar place, but as we run it more and more often, we should start getting more random results as to where that shows up. So we'll just try it one more time and see what it does. It's kind of locked into that place down here. What we'll have to do is mess around with it a little bit and see if the next time it shows up in a slightly different place. So just for fun, let's go into our moment 60. And let's try the same thing here, okay? Let's put in that random function. So I'm going to go into my moment 120. I'm going to highlight this by clicking and dragging and hitting Control C to copy. And then I'm going to come back up here to my first one, and I'm going to paste this into the Y. So it's the random room height minus 100 plus 50. I'll be curious to see now what GameMaker does with this. So there's my first enemy down there, and notice how my second enemy is now lower. Okay, so it is kind of randomizing, but I feel like sometimes it picks the same number first and builds it off of there. So that's kind of interesting that that's how GameMaker handles these random numbers. We'll have to see as we keep playing this if it starts to change it up a little bit. And if it doesn't, we'll take a look and see if we can figure out something different besides random. Now I'm going to show you one more thing. Let's bring in a group of enemies in a pattern, maybe like a diamond or something like that. So let's add another moment. Let's call this moment 61. We'll call it maybe 150. Bring it in a little bit sooner. All right. Whoops, didn't mean to add that moment in. So we're going to go ahead and add that. And I just clicked on the wrong moment. We're going to bring in a squadron of enemies. So I'm going to bring out a create instance, and the object is going to be the, again, the object enemy. The X is going to be room width, whoops, the wrong one, room width, and we're going to add 50 to this one. And my Y is going to be, let's make our Y here at 400. All right, now I'm going to add in a second enemy. So we're going to choose that object enemy again. And we're going to, this time, say the room width. And let's add 150 to this one. This will make it appear farther back. And let's make it its Y value 300. This will make it appear up higher. And we're going to add one more in. So go to my object. Whoops, grab the wrong one. Grab thing. Object player. Enemy, sorry. This will be room width again. This will also be 150, so it appears behind the first one. And the first one's at 400, so we're going to make this one 500, so that it appears below. So now we go ahead and play. Now these will always come in at the same place. Okay, so there's my first enemy. And there you can see them showing up. There's that squadron right there. Okay. So if I play that again, I might tighten that up a little bit. So these gaps, 400, 300, I might instead do this one at 350 so that it's a little bit lower. And this one down here, I might make it instead more like 450. So instead of 500, we'll make this 450. That'll tighten that formation up a little bit. And now when I hit play, we'll see that formation come in. So you can see that formation is now tighter. Okay. And then that's basically how you're going to start filling in your timeline step by step. You're going to continue to add moments in and see if you can figure out how you want them coming in. And we'll talk a little bit more about those. But that's the introduction to timelines.